Keir Starmer's off to Kyiv today to sign what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership with Ukraine. And nobody knows why. He didn't mention it yesterday. He didn't say that he was forming a 100-year partnership with Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky. What does it mean? We're going to ask Jack Elsom about it, Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun. Jack, a very good morning to you. What's it all about, this 100-year partnership with Ukraine? Has anyone told you?
Morning, Mike. Good to be with you. Well, I think the details are going to be fleshed out when he is over there in Kyiv. But what this is Keir Starmer making his first trip as Prime Minister to meet President Zelensky in Ukraine. It is, as he describes it, a show of the unbreakable bond between the two countries that have really formed since Russia's invasion back in 2022. What we have now in this conflict really is, I think, a slow drumbeat towards a peace deal. Both sides are talking this up now, something that was unthinkable at the start of this war. And Keir Starmer, to his credit, has been very vocal in saying that he wants to put Ukraine in the best position possible. So when he does sit down with the Russians, the carve-up of land goes in Zelensky's favour. Now, obviously, people stress on both sides in Ukraine and in the West that this has to be done on Zelensky's terms. But if he is edging towards striking some sort of agreement with the Russians to bring this horrific war to an end, then he needs all of the Western allies in his corner. And so I think this is a show of strength to Vladimir Putin that, despite the fact that Zelensky might be willing to sit around the negotiating table, he still has the UK, the US, other Western allies backing him.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's move on to a big piece on page 10 in the Sun today. Leo McKinstry writing about compensation for Gerry Adams. Big story that broke yesterday morning. Telegraph splashed it. It came out of a think tank report, I think. Keir Starmer was forced to address it in the Commons as well, because the deal seems to be that the Labour government is changing the law as it currently exists because of what they regard as a badly framed law. But unfortunately, in reframing it, they're going to probably allow the possibility of compensation to be claimed by the likes of Gerry Adams and other people linked to terrorism in Northern Ireland.
Yes, totally. And I think when people saw this story yesterday, most right-minded people would have reacted in absolute disgust and disbelief for the reasons that Leo McKinstry today in The Sun lays out in pretty methodical detail. He says that Gerry Adams was, at best, an apologist for terrorism, and any penny of taxpayer money going to him would be nothing short of a national humiliation. Now, thank God that Downing Street seems to have discovered some political antennae, because Keir Starmer yesterday in the Commons said that he would make any possible avenue to stop this from happening. So that was a good sign. The problem is that it's all going to be now in the execution and the detail.
Right.
Because they couldn't give a guarantee yesterday that they would have legal options to be able to actually do this. They said they're going to look at every conceivable way, but that's still short of actually doing something.
Exactly.
And what you can imagine now is that there is going to be a collision between what the government wants and what the courts adjudicate. Now, the Tories seem to be up for this fight, and they were appealing against this High Court decision. Whether Keir Starmer wants to butt heads with the judiciary is another matter with this one. And you can bet your life on the fact that what it will do is open up more arguments about leaving the European Convention of Human Rights and repealing the Human Rights Act, because that underpins this ruling. Will Keir Starmer do that? Well, he's previously said in the past that that is not an option which would be acceptable to him. But, you know, if Gerry Adams does get this payout, then a lot of people are going to be very angry.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? Because, one, they're setting up the framework for this law to change so that compensation claims could be made. And then they're immediately going to try and stop people from making compensation claims. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And with lawyers being the way they are, particularly human rights lawyers, they're going to paint themselves into a bit of a corner, it seems to me, here.
Yes, definitely. And there's 400 cases, compensation cases, currently being lodged. And we know Keir Starmer is a former human rights lawyer himself. He's obviously beforehand said that he, obviously messaged respect for the rule of law, and you just can't imagine him wanting at all to go against the judiciary. And so that is why Labour decided to abandon the previous government's appeal against this decision. But like you said, in doing so, created a loophole in which former people who were held during the Troubles, like Gerry Adams, could be entitled for taxpayer cash. Keir Starmer now, what he needs to do is put his money where his mouth is, because talk is cheap. And in the Commons yesterday, he managed to get himself out of a hole by saying he would look at this. Now, right-minded voters are going to want him to actually act on it.
Yeah, exactly right. And the other big story, we're going to talk about it actually with a colleague of yours later on, is the front page of The Sun today, which is a great story, which has also made the leader column as well. Promotion of this ghastly wannabe gangster Jake Fari, who calls himself 10, by the BBC. He's the very same man who is in prison for life, supposedly, for the murder of Jimmy Mizzen in 2008. He's obviously now out of prison because life does not mean life in this country, sadly. And what on earth is the BBC thinking?
This is an absolutely breathtaking story, and one that really, really does make the skin crawl. We've today revealed in The Sun, put it across the front page, that the murderer of schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen in 2008 is now a drill rapper. Jake Fari glorifies violence. He didn't seem to show any remorse during the trial itself. He doesn't seem to show any remorse now. Anyone that looks at the lyrics themselves will see that he glorifies violence in a pretty disgusting and despicable way. And, if that were the end of it, it would still be a pretty crushing insult to the victims' families. But it goes even one step further, because it's being promoted on the BBC. The BBC are on pretty thin ice as it is over the past few years. I think that most right-minded people in this country would be absolutely shocked and appalled with this. The BBC put out a statement last night and said that they don't promote the glorification of violence whatsoever, but they are promoting someone who is not only a convicted murderer, but someone who is still pumping out pretty horrific lyrics in his songs. And so it's pretty simple now for the BBC. Will they apologise for that? Where did the vetting go wrong on putting this this criminal out on BBC Radio 1 Extra? Will they take this song down from BBC Sounds, and will they say they won't do it again? And so I think that people reading the story today, and I highly recommend they do, will be totally and utterly shocked at the lack of judgment and foresight by our national broadcaster. This was a commercial station. It will be bad enough in itself, but the fact that we pay licence fee payer money to this, I think people will expect a higher standard from the BBC. It's an absolutely shocking story, and you can read all about it in The Sun today.
Absolutely right. Jack, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Jack Elsom, Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun.